In the village of Zango, where desperation dances with darkness, there lived a woman named Salima, whose trade in colorful buckets would teach the village that sometimes the brightest opportunities cast the darkest shadows. In the heart of the village of Zango, where the sun painted shadows between mud brick houses and children's laughter echoed through narrow paths, lived a woman named Salima. Her life was a testament to hardship, her existence a daily struggle against the crushing weight of poverty that seemed to follow her like a persistent shadow. Salima's home, if one could call it that, stood at the edge of the village, a dilapidated structure that seemed to bow under its own weight. During the rainy season, water dripped through countless holes in the roof, creating small puddles on the dirt floor where she slept. The windows, missing their shutters, let in the cold night air that wrapped around her like an unwelcome embrace as she curled up on her bare floor, using her arms as a pillow. Her clothes told their own story of destitution, a collection of rags held together by hope more than thread. They hung loosely on her frame, patches upon patches, each tear a reminder of another day survived rather than lived. The villagers would often see her walking through the dusty paths, her feet bare and calloused, her back bent not by age but by the invisible burden she carried. The contrast between Salima and the other women of Zango was stark and painful to witness. While they gathered at the village square, their colorful wrappers bright against the afternoon sun, their children playing at their feet, Salima would hover at the edges like a forgotten shadow. These women wore their marriage beads with pride, their faces glowing with the contentment of those who had found their place in the world. Their homes echoed with the sounds of family life, the clatter of cooking pots, the murmur of conversation, the gentle lullabies sung to sleepy children. But what set Salima apart even more than her poverty was the whispered curse that followed her through the village. Bad luck clings to her like a second skin, the elders would mutter, shaking their heads. Young mothers would pull their children close when she passed, fearing her misfortune might be contagious. Men averted their eyes, not wanting to tempt fate by showing her kindness. Even the village dogs seemed to sense her isolation, giving her a wide berth as she made her way through the streets. Yet there was something in Salima's eyes, a flicker of defiance, a spark that refused to be extinguished by the harsh winds of fate. It spoke of a spirit that, though battered, had not been broken by the weight of her circumstances. Little did the villagers know that this spark would soon ignite a chain of events that would shake their community to its very foundations. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun hung like a molten coin in the sky, Salima made her way to the river with her bundle of tattered clothes. The water sparkled before her, its surface dancing with diamond-bright reflections, offering a momentary escape from her daily struggles. As she knelt by the riverbank, the gentle sound of rushing water nearly masked the soft footsteps approaching behind her. When Salima turned, her heart skipped a beat. There, standing like an apparition in the harsh afternoon light, was a woman unlike any she had ever seen in Zango. The stranger's clothes were made of fabric so fine it seemed to catch the sunlight and hold it, her jewelry glinting like stars fallen to earth. But it was her smile that caught Salima's attention, sharp as a knife's edge and just as dangerous. "Good day," the woman said, her voice flowing smooth as honey from a comb. "I am Ki." She spoke Salima's name as if they were old friends, though Salima was certain they had never met. The mysterious woman's eyes seemed to peer straight through to Salima's soul, reading every hardship written there. "I've been watching you," Ki continued, moving closer with the fluid grace of a leopard. "I know your struggles, your pain, your dreams." Each word seemed to wrap around Salima like a silk thread, drawing her deeper into the stranger's web. "I have a proposition for you, one that will change your fortune forever." Salima's throat felt dry as desert sand. What kind of proposition? She managed to whisper, her voice barely audible above the river's song. Ki reached into the folds of her elaborate dress and withdrew a bundle of crisp notes, more money than Salima had ever seen in one place. The bills seemed to whisper promises of a better life as they caught the breeze. "Your task is simple," Ki said, her smile widening. "Collect used panties from the villagers. Bring them to me, and you'll be rewarded handsomely." Confusion clouded Salima's mind like morning mist. "Panties," she echoed, the strange request hanging in the air between them. But before she could ask why, Ki pressed the money into her hands. The bills felt warm, almost alive against her palm. "Don't ask questions," Ki commanded softly. "Just do as I say, and poverty will become nothing but a distant memory. With those words, she turned and walked away, her silhouette shimmering like a mirage in the afternoon heat. Salima stood frozen by the river, the money clutched in her trembling hands. Her mind swirled with questions, but the weight of the bills was real enough. For the first time in years, hope bloomed in her chest, fragile as a butterfly's wing, but undeniably present. She didn't understand the purpose behind the strange request, but perhaps understanding wasn't necessary. Perhaps this was the chance she had been praying for all along. The next morning, Salima woke with purpose burning in her heart. She knew the villagers would grow suspicious if she asked only for panties, so she crafted a plan as careful as a spider weaving its web. Taking the money Key had given her, she walked to the nearest market town, where the morning air buzzed with the excitement of trade and possibility. There she invested in wares that would catch any woman's eye, buckets in colors bright as tropical birds and bowls that gleamed like precious metals under the sun. Each piece was carefully chosen, knowing how they would sparkle and tempt in the dusty lanes of Zango. The vendors watched with curiosity as this raggedly dressed woman selected the finest items with unexpected precision. Back in Zango, Salima began her rounds. Her first stop was at the house of an elderly woman whose suspicious eyes softened at the sight of a beautiful blue bucket. "Good morning," Mama Salima called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm trading these fine items for old clothes, shoes, and panties." She added the last word casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The old woman's face crinkled with interest. "Wait here," she said, disappearing into her hut. She returned with a pile of worn clothes topped with several pairs of old panties. The exchange was made with a smile, as Salima's clever trade had begun. House after house, the pattern repeated. Women eagerly traded their unwanted items for Salima's bright, new wares. Children would run ahead of her, announcing her arrival. "The bucket lady is coming." By sunset, her sack was heavy with the day's collection, and her reputation as a shrewd trader was growing. But it was in the dead of night that the darker part of her work began. Under the cover of darkness, Salima would slip out to a hidden spot near the river. There, she would sort through her day's collection with trembling fingers, separating the precious panties from the rest. The unwanted clothes and shoes she would feed to hungry flames, watching as they turned to ash and smoke that drifted away on the night wind. The panties she wrapped carefully in clean cloth, like sacred objects, before making her way to her midnight meetings with Key. These encounters were brief and wordless, just an exchange of the bundle for payment, conducted in shadows deep enough to hide the shame in Salima's eyes. With each successful trade, the weight of coins in her pocket grew heavier, but so did the burden of her secret. Yet she pressed on, telling herself that sometimes the path to a better life must win through shadows before reaching the light. Word of Salima's trade spread through the region like wildfire in the dry season. What began in the narrow paths of Zango soon stretched to neighboring villages, where women would gather eagerly at the first sight of her approaching figure. "Salima is coming," they would call to each other, their voices bright with excitement. The woman they once shunned as cursed had become a herald of prosperity, her arrival celebrated like the first rains after drought. All gone was the pitiful figure in tattered clothes. In her place stood a woman transformed, wrapped in fabrics as vibrant as her wares. Her once hollow cheeks had filled out, and she walked with the confidence of someone who no longer feared tomorrow's hunger. The same villagers who once crossed the street to avoid her now called out greetings, eager to catch her attention and secure the best deals. Her dilapidated hut underwent its own metamorphosis. The leaky roof that had once let in rain and cold was replaced with sturdy palm leaves, carefully layered to keep out the elements. New shutters adorned the windows, and a fresh coat of clay smoothed the walls. Inside, she added comfortable furnishings, a real bed to replace the hard floor, cooking pots that gleamed in the firelight, and even a mirror that reflected back the image of a woman she barely recognized. In the village square, women gathered to compare their acquisitions from Salima's trade. They displayed their colorful buckets and bowls with pride, each piece a testament to their own cleverness in striking a good bargain. "Have you traded with Salima yet?" became a common question among neighbors, and those who hadn't would rush to gather their old clothes at the first opportunity. Even the wealthier women of Zango, who had once looked down their noses at her, now waited eagerly for her visits. They would compete to offer the largest bundles of clothes, each hoping to secure the finest pieces from her collection. Young brides added Salima's wares to their wedding lists, considering them essential items for starting their new homes. Yet beneath this glittering success lay a shadow that grew longer with each passing day. Every night as the village slept, Salima still made her secret journeys to meet Ki. The weight of her prosperity bore the price of these midnight exchanges, though none suspected the true nature of her trade. She had become a bridge between two worlds, the bright, bustling days of commerce and the dark, whispered nights of hidden rituals. While most of Zango slept peacefully, Tinu lay awake, her mind troubled by the mysteries that surrounded her neighbor. From her window, she had watched Salima's nightly departures for weeks, each time with a heavy sack slung over her shoulder, returning hours later with empty hands and full pockets. Something about these midnight journeys stirred an unease in Tinu's heart that refused to let her rest. One particularly dark night, when even the moon hid behind thick clouds, Tinu wrapped herself in a heavy shawl and made her decision. As Salima's shadow slipped past her window, Tinu followed, her feet moving silently in the familiar paths of their village. Her heart thundered in her chest, but curiosity drove her forward like a charm. Candles flickered in a perfect circle around her, their flames dancing unnaturally still in the night air. Salima approached, dropping her sack before the mysterious woman. Tinu watched, her fingers digging into the earth beneath her, as Ki opened the sack and began removing only the panties, discarding everything else. Then the true horror began. Ki's voice rose in a chant that seemed to thicken the air itself, words in a language that made Tinu's skin crawl. The candle's flame stretched toward the sky, and before Tinu's disbelieving eyes the panties began to vanish one by one, leaving behind a sickly, ghostly glow. A sound like laughter, but no laughter Tinu had ever heard before, echoed through the night, sending chills down her spine. Terror gripped Tinu's heart like a cold hand, but she forced herself to watch until the ritual ended. When Ki finally departed, leaving Salima counting her payment by the dying candlelight, Tinu fled back to the village. Her legs trembled beneath her, and every shadow seemed to reach for her with dark intent. She didn't stop running until she reached her hut, bolting the door behind her. Sleep was impossible now. The images of what she'd witnessed burned into her mind like brands. As the first light of dawn broke over Zango, Tinu was already on her way to the elders' compound. Her voice shook as she pounded on their doors, knowing that what she had to tell them would shatter their village's peace forever. The village bell rang out in the grey dawn, its sharp clang slicing through the morning mist like a blade. Men, women, and children emerged from their huts, rubbing sleep from their eyes as they gathered in the square. The air was thick with tension as the elders took their places, their faces grave as storm clouds. Salima stood in the center, her legs trembling like leaves in the wind. The villagers who had so recently praised her name now pressed back against the edges of the square, as if her curse might be contagious. The head elder's voice cut through the whispers. "Salima, your neighbor Tinu has brought disturbing news. We demand to know the truth about your trade." But when Salima opened her mouth to speak, only a strangled cry emerged. "I can't," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The oath. If I speak, I will run mad or die." Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. The elders exchanged glances before the head elder nodded to a young man. "Bring the chief priest," he commanded. Minutes stretched like hours until the priest arrived, his staff tapping against the earth with each step. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fixed on Salima. "You've taken an oath?" the priest asked, his deep voice rolling like distant thunder. Salima nodded, her body shaking with silent sobs. The priest raised his staff and began to chant, his voice rising and falling like waves on a shore. The air grew heavy, and a strange stillness settled over the square as his chants wrapped around Salima like invisible ropes. Finally, he pointed his staff at her. "Speak," he commanded. "The spirits will protect you." Salima collapsed to her knees, words pouring from her like water from a broken pot. "It's Kia," she sobbed. "She's not what she seems. She's a ritualist who used me to collect your panties, not for trade, but for dark magic." The crowd surged with murmurs of horror as Salima continued. "Each night she performs rituals with them, using them to steal your life force, your fortune, your very souls. She grows stronger with each piece I bring her, feeding on your essence like a demon in the night." Salima's voice cracked with despair. "I had no choice. She bound me with an oath of blood and terror. She said she would kill me if I refused or spoke of our deal. I was desperate, hungry, alone. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. The silence that followed was complete, broken only by the sound of Salima's weeping. The villagers stood frozen, the horror of realization dawning on their faces as they understood the true cost of their traits. Their friendly merchant had been a vessel for evil, and they had unknowingly fed a darkness that grew stronger with each passing night. The chief priest stood tall in the village square, his staff planted firmly in the earth, as he surveyed the gathered women. Each had stepped forward, confessing to trading their undergarments, their faces pale with fear of what their innocent exchanges had wrought. The priest drew a circle in the dirt around them, his deep voice rising in ancient chants that made the very air tremble. As his power grew, the circle began to glow with a faint, ethereal light. The women swayed, caught in the current of his protective magic, while the rest of the village watched in awed silence. The curse is breaking, the priest declared, but it will not fully lift until we destroy its source. His eyes closed in concentration, the staff quivering in his grasp. She is close, he announced, his voice booming across the square. Her lair lies beneath the old baobab tree. The villagers gasped. That ancient tree had long been whispered about, its twisted roots said to harbor dark spirits. Armed with torches, sticks, and stones, the villagers marched toward the baobab, their faces set with grim determination. The priest led them, his staff glowing faintly in the growing darkness. At the tree's base, they discovered what generations of children's tales had hinted at: a hidden entrance, a dark tunnel leading into the earth. The strongest men entered first, their torches illuminating a chamber that reeked of decay and dark magic. They emerged dragging a struggling Key, her once magnificent robes now tattered, her face contorted with rage and fear. "You fools," she spat, her voice like the hiss of a snake. "You dare defy me." The priest stepped forward, unmoved by her threats. His chants grew stronger, each word seeming to strip away layers of Key's power. She screamed, clutching her head, as the villagers stormed her lair, smashing the strange artifacts and charms that littered the space. Each item destroyed weakened her further, her screams growing fainter. They dragged her back to the village square, to the very tree under which she had once been welcomed as a mysterious stranger. Now, it would witness her final moments. The head elder's voice rang out, "You have stolen from us, cursed our people. Today your reign of terror ends." The first stone flew, then another and another. Kia's final screams echoed briefly before fading into silence. When it was done, the villagers stood in solemn silence, the weight of what they'd done heavy in their hearts. But the air felt lighter, as if the land itself was relieved. "The village is free," the chief priest declared, raising his hands to the heavens. "But let this be a lesson: evil thrives where greed and secrecy grow. We must remain vigilant." The villagers nodded, knowing they would tell this tale to their children, and their children's children, a reminder of the price of trust betrayed. Though Kia's evil had been vanquished, her dark magic left lasting scars on those who had dared to expose her. The morning after the witch's death, Tinu woke to darkness. Her eyes, which had witnessed the forbidden ritual by the river, now saw only shadows. She wept bitterly, her tears falling into a void she couldn't see. The villagers rallied around their brave neighbor, carrying her to the chief priest day after day. He performed ritual after ritual, burning sacred herbs and chanting ancient prayers, until finally, like dawn breaking through night, Tinu's sight returned. She blinked away tears of joy as the familiar faces of her community came into focus once more. But for Salima, the healing was not complete. Her legs, once strong enough to carry heavy sacks across villages, now trembled beneath her like wet reeds. Each step became a battle, her body bearing the weight of her guilt. Though the priest tried his most powerful medicines and prayers, her affliction remained a permanent reminder of her dealings with dark forces. Shame grew too heavy for Salima to bear. Though the villagers no longer cursed her name aloud, their silent stares and whispered words followed her like shadows. She knew she could never rebuild what she had lost. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, Salima gathered her few belongings into a small bundle. With faltering steps, she limped down the dusty road leading out of Zango, leaving behind a village that would forever tell her story as a warning to others. Tinu's courage, however, did not go unrewarded. News of her bravery reached the ears of the king, and his son became intrigued by tales of the woman who had helped save her village from dark magic. When he came to Zango to see her for himself, he found not just a hero, but a woman of strength and beauty. Their wedding celebration lasted 7 days, with villagers dancing and singing praise to the woman who had risked everything to protect them. As seasons passed, the tale of Salima and the stolen panties became legend in Zango. Around evening fires, elders would gather children close and tell them of the woman who traded her neighbors' souls for wealth, and of brave Tinu who exposed the truth. The story served as a powerful reminder that evil often comes disguised as opportunity, and that the price of greed is paid not just by the greedy, but by an entire community. Yet some say that on quiet nights when the moon is hidden and the wind blows cold, the sound of limping footsteps can still be heard on the outskirts of the village, a ghost of a memory, a warning echoing through time. Years after Salima's departure, the elders of Zango would gather the young ones under the sprawling branches of the village's oldest iroko tree. As evening shadows lengthened and crickets began their nightly chorus, they would share the tale that had forever changed their community. Their voices would grow heavy with wisdom as they spoke of the woman who once walked their paths with hope-filled dreams and empty pockets. Listen carefully, children, the elders would begin, his weathered face glowing in the warm light of the setting sun. For the sweetest honey can hide the deadliest poison. He would tell them of how Kihai had appeared like a dream to Salima, offering promises as bright as morning gold but as hollow as a dry well. We saw the changes in Salima, one of the women would add, her eyes distant with memory. We celebrated her rise from poverty, praised her cleverness in trade, but we did not ask questions when fortune smiled too quickly upon her. We were all eager to trade our old things for her shining wares, never wondering about the true price we were paying. The children would lean forward, entranced, as the elders spoke of how the entire village had been caught in the web of dark magic, each person's trust and silence weakening the bonds that had protected their community for generations. They would describe how it took one person's courage, Tinu's vigilant heart, and brave spirit to save them all from a fate worse than poverty. Remember, another elder would say, her voice soft but firm, that desperation can make the impossible seem possible, the wrong seem right. Salima's hunger for a better life was not evil, it lives in all our hearts. But when we let this hunger blind us, we risk not just our own souls, but the very fabric of our community. The tale would turn to how the village had united against evil, how their collective strength had overcome dark magic. But they never spoke of these events with pride or triumph. Instead, their words carried the weight of hard-learned wisdom, of knowledge paid for with pain and loss. We are not just individuals seeking our own fortune, the head elder would conclude, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. We are a community bound together by trust and responsibility. When one of us breaks this trust, we all bear the cost. And when evil comes, and it will come, wearing many beautiful masks, it is our unity that will be our strongest defense. As the children would return to their homes in the gathering dusk, they carried with them not just a story, but a deep understanding that would guide their choices in years to come. For in Zango, they had learned that true wealth lies not in shining trinkets or easy promises, but in the strength of a community that stands together against the darkness. Decades passed, and the village of Zango grew and changed like a tree, adding new rings to its trunk. Yet some things remained constant, like the way mothers would warn their children, don't be like Salima, whenever they caught them in moments of greed or deception. Her name had become woven into the very language of the village, a shorthand for the price of betrayal. In the evening hours, when work was done and families gathered in courtyards under star-filled skies, the old stories would flow like sweet palm wine. But none was told more often than the tale of the woman who traded in panties, the mysterious stranger who nearly stole their souls, and the brave neighbor who saved them all. Each telling added new details, new lessons like bright threads woven into an ancient tapestry. When traders would arrive in Zango with unusual offerings or strange proposals, the villagers would exchange knowing looks. Remember the buckets, they would whisper to each other, and deals that seemed too good to be true were met with polite but firm refusal. The children of Zango learned to recognize the gleam of opportunity in strangers' eyes, to question gifts that came without clear purpose. The old baobab tree still stood at the edge of the village, its massive trunk bearing silent witness to the years. Young couples no longer courted in its shade, and children were forbidden to play among its roots. Yet it served as a permanent reminder of their triumph over evil, a monument to the day the village united to protect its own. During important ceremonies, the griots would sing of Tinu's bravery and the price of Salima's choice. Their songs carried the story to neighboring villages, where it took root and sprouted new variations, each telling shaped by local tongues but carrying the same core truth, that a community's strength lies not in its wealth but in its unity. Even as the village embraced progress and change, certain traditions remained sacred. New homes were built with windows facing away from the river where Kihi had performed her dark rituals. Every year during the festival of cleansing, the villagers would gather to renew their bonds of trust and vigilance, sharing meals and stories that reinforced their collective memory. And so the tale lived on, not just as a story but as a living part of Zango's identity. It taught each new generation that true prosperity grows not from magical promises or quick fortune, but from the patient nurturing of community bonds. In this way, what began as a tragedy became a source of strength, a reminder that even the darkest nights could lead to brighter dawns, if only the village remembered to stand together against the shadows.